The morning Amelia Carter lost everything began with a single splash of dirty water. She stood on the polished marble steps of Grant and Hale Financial Tower, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her heels clicking like warnings against the silence of the early city morning. She was 29, ambitious, respected, and feared by half the employees in the building. As the youngest regional operations director in the company's history, she had built her reputation on perfection. She believed weakness was expensive, kindness was often mistaken for incompetence, and emotions had no place in business. That morning, rain had just stopped, leaving puddles along the sidewalk. The city was still waking up when she saw him. An old beggar sat near the entrance, wrapped in torn clothes, his beard gray and wild, his hands rough with time. His wheelchair looked older than he did, rusted and barely holding together. A small cardboard sign rested on his lap, asking only for help and a little dignity. Amelia frowned instantly. This was the entrance to one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. Investors walked through those doors. Executives from around the world entered there. And now, this man sat there like a stain on polished glass. She marched toward him, her irritation already rising like steam. What happened next would destroy everything she thought she knew about power, pride, and people. Before we continue, if you believe kindness matters more than appearances and that everyone deserves a second chance, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, life-changing stories. Amelia stopped in front of the old man and looked down at him with cold impatience. Her voice was sharp enough to cut stone. She told him he was embarrassing the building, that successful people shouldn't have to step over someone like him every morning. She accused him of using pity as a profession and said people like him were the reason no one trusted the poor anymore. People passing by slowed down. Some watched. Some looked away. The old man simply looked at her. His eyes were not angry. They were calm, almost sad. That only irritated her more. Nearby sat a janitor's bucket filled with rainwater from the morning cleanup. In a moment of cruel frustration, Amelia grabbed it and poured it over him. The water crashed over his shoulders, soaking his shirt, dripping from his beard, splashing onto the sidewalk. Gasps rose from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." But the old man didn't yell, he didn't curse. He simply lifted his face, water running down his skin, and looked at her like someone remembering a painful truth. Amelia adjusted her blazer, turned, and walked into the building as if she had just fixed a problem. She had no idea she had just humiliated the founder of the company. Inside the executive boardroom on the 32nd floor, the atmosphere felt strange. Everyone was quiet. Too quiet. The assistant whispered that the chairman had arrived unexpectedly and requested a full leadership meeting immediately. Amelia straightened, slightly annoyed. She hated surprise meetings. She entered the room confident, carrying her tablet and her usual authority. Then she froze. At the head of the table sat the same old man. Except now he wore a clean charcoal suit. His beard was trimmed. His wheelchair had been replaced by a polished, motorized one. Around him stood the most powerful executives in the company, all silent, all serious. His name was Charles Grant, founder of Grant and Hale, billionaire, legend, and Amelia's ultimate boss. Her blood turned cold. She had seen his photos before, but only old corporate portraits from years ago. After his wife passed and his health declined, he had vanished from public life. Rumors said he spent most of his time anonymously visiting branches, observing how people treated those they believed had nothing to offer. She had laughed at those rumors. Now she stood inside them. Charles looked at her quietly. No anger. That was somehow worse. He simply asked her to sit. Her hands trembled as she lowered herself into the chair. The meeting lasted 40 unbearable minutes. Charles reviewed reports, asked questions, listened carefully. Asked questions. He treated everyone with calm professionalism. He did not mention the street. Not once. That silence was heavier than shouting. At the very end, he folded his hands and looked directly at Amelia. He said leadership was not measured by how one treated investors, but by how one treated people who could offer nothing in return. He said character was never revealed in comfort, only in moments where no one important seemed to be watching. Then he announced that Amelia was being suspended pending review. The room felt like it stopped breathing. She nodded stiffly, unable to speak. Her career, the thing she had sacrificed relationships, sleep, and years of her life for, was collapsing in front of her. She walked out of the building with everyone watching. This time, she was the one people stepped around. For the first time in years, silence followed her home. Her apartment overlooked the city skyline, all glass and expensive loneliness. Usually, she loved it. That night, it felt like a museum built for someone else's life. She replayed the moment again and again, the bucket, the water, his eyes. She told herself she had only protected the company's image. She told herself discipline mattered, standards mattered. But another voice, quieter and far more dangerous, asked a different question. Why had she needed to humiliate him? That question refused to leave. She barely slept. The next morning, she visited her mother. Her mother lived in a small neighborhood far from downtown towers and polished meetings. She had raised Amelia alone after her father died when Amelia was 12. She had worked 2 jobs cleaning offices and serving at diners so Amelia could study and escape poverty. Her mother listened silently as Amelia explained everything. When she finished expecting comfort, she received disappointment instead. Her mother looked at her with tears in her eyes and asked if she had forgotten where they came from. She reminded Amelia of the winters when they survived on donated groceries, of the landlord who mocked them, of the strangers whose small kindnesses had kept them alive. Then she said something Amelia would never forget. The worst poverty is not in the wallet, it's in the heart. Amelia cried for the first time in years. Not elegant tears, real ones, ugly ones. The kind that breaks something open. She realized success had not made her stronger. It had made her colder. And somewhere along the way, she had become the kind of person she once feared. Days passed. Her suspension remained. Social media had somehow learned part of the story. People whispered. Some defended her. Most didn't. She wanted to disappear. Instead, she did something unexpected. She went looking for Charles Grant, not the billionaire, the man in the wheelchair. She found him 3 days later at a small community shelter on the edge of the city. He sat with veterans, single mothers, and homeless families, serving soup like he belonged there more than any boardroom. He noticed her immediately. She walked toward him with no power suit, no perfect posture, no shield, just honesty. She apologized, not the polished kind executives use to save reputations. A real apology. She admitted her cruelty, her arrogance, her fear. She admitted she had judged him because seeing him reminded her of the life she had worked so desperately to escape. Charles listened. When she finished, he asked her a simple question. It really been just a beggar. What's your apology? That question hit harder than public humiliation ever could, because she knew the truth. At first, no. At first, she had only cared because of who he was, and facing that truth was the beginning of real change. She said yes now, but admitted she had needed this pain to understand it. Charles nodded slowly. Then he told her something no one in the company knew. He had once been homeless. Before the empire, before the towers, before the billions, there had been hunger, rejection, and sleeping in bus stations. One stranger had shown him kindness when he looked like nothing. That single act had changed his life. He never forgot it, and he spent the rest of his life trying to discover who understood that lesson and who didn't. He said wealth reveals people, it doesn't improve them. Then he offered Amelia something she did not expect, not forgiveness, a chance to earn it. He asked her to spend 30 days volunteering at the shelter. No cameras, no publicity, no corporate redemption story, just service. She agreed immediately, and those 30 days changed her more than every promotion before them. She listened to stories from people she would once have ignored. A former teacher sleeping in her car after medical debt destroyed her life. A teenage boy protecting his little sister after losing both parents. A retired mechanic who still gave half his meals away. She discovered suffering had faces, names, histories, not labels, not inconveniences, people. She learned humility in kitchens and hallways, not boardrooms. She laughed more. She judged less. She called her mother every day. She even apologized to former coworkers she had hurt on her climb upward. Some forgave her, some didn't. She accepted both, because growth is not always rewarded. Sometimes it is simply necessary. At the end of 30 days, Charles asked her to meet him again. This time, there was sunlight in the room. He told her he had reviewed not just her work, but her change. He said punishment without transformation was useless. Then he offered her reinstatement, not to her old position, but as director of the company's new community investment division, focused on housing, outreach, and employee ethics training. Less prestige, more purpose. Ugh. Years earlier, she would have considered it an insult. Now, she accepted with tears in her eyes, because for the first time, success meant something beyond herself. Before we reach the ending, if this story has touched your heart even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life stories that remind us what really matters. And I have one special request for you. Comment below with just one word. A kindness if you believe a single act of compassion can change someone's entire life. Months later, Amelia stood once again outside Grant & Hale Financial Tower. The same steps, the same city, but a completely different woman. Near the entrance sat an elderly man asking quietly for help. People passed him without looking. Amelia walked over slowly. She knelt beside him. She offered food, conversation, and respect. No cameras, no audience, just humanity. As she stood to leave, she glanced up at the building behind her, the place where she had once believed power lived. Now she knew better. Power was not in titles, not in money, not in corner offices. Real power was in mercy, in humility, in choosing kindness when cruelty is easier. And somewhere across the street, watching quietly from his car, Charles Grant smiled, because the woman who had once poured water on a beggar had finally learned how to become human again. Sometimes the greatest promotions in life do not happen in boardrooms. They happen in the heart. Months passed, and the story that once nearly destroyed Amelia Carter slowly became the story that rebuilt her. Her new office was smaller, tucked away on the 17th floor instead of the prestigious executive level on 32. There were no floor-to-ceiling windows, no private assistant waiting with coffee, no constant parade of investors trying to impress her. At first glance, it looked like a demotion, but every morning when Amelia walked in, she felt something she had never felt in her old office. Peace. Her work now was different. Instead of managing profit reports and intimidating department heads, she was helping design programs for struggling employees, funding shelters, creating scholarship opportunities for children of low-income workers, and building ethical leadership training across the company. She was no longer feared. She was finally respected. Still, not everyone believed her change was real. Some employees whispered that she was only pretending to be compassionate to save her reputation. Others remembered too clearly the cold woman she used to be. Amelia didn't fight the rumors. She knew trust was not something you demanded. It was something you earned slowly, painfully over time. Every Friday evening, she still volunteered at the shelter. She served meals, cleaned tables, listened to stories, and sometimes simply sat beside people who needed silence more than advice. She never posted about it. She never told reporters. It was not charity anymore. It was repentance. One rainy evening, while organizing donated clothes in the shelter basement, she met someone who would test everything she claimed to have learned. Her name was Lily. She was 19, thin, exhausted, and carrying a baby girl barely 6 months old. Her clothes were worn, and her eyes held the kind of fear that comes from too many nights without safety. Lily had escaped an abusive relationship and had nowhere else to go. No family willing to help. No savings. No plan beyond surviving until morning. Amelia saw herself in that fear, not her present self, but the child she used to be. The girl who watched her mother count coins at the kitchen table. The girl who learned too early that poverty often came with humiliation. Lily didn't trust easily. She expected judgment. She expected lectures. She expected disappointment. Instead, Amelia sat with her for hours, helping her fill out paperwork, arranging emergency housing, and finding child care resources. When Lily cried because she was ashamed of needing help, Amelia held her hand and told her shame belonged to the people who hurt her, not to her. That night, Amelia drove home in silence, realizing something painful. For years, she had spent her life trying to prove she was nothing like the poor girl she once was. Now, she understood she should have been trying to protect her instead. At the next executive leadership meeting, Charles Grant asked Amelia to present the first results of the company's new community programs. She stood before the same people who had once watched her downfall. Some still looked skeptical. Some looked curious. She spoke without performance. She showed how employee emergency funds had prevented evictions, how scholarships had kept students in school, how mental health support had reduced burnout, how compassion, when treated seriously, was not weakness but strength. She finished with something unexpected. She admitted publicly that the entire division existed because of her failure. She told them leadership without humanity was dangerous. She said she had once believed success meant standing above people when real success meant lifting them. The room was silent. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not for the numbers, for the truth. After the meeting, a junior analyst named Daniel approached her. Months earlier, Amelia had once humiliated him in front of an entire department over a minor reporting mistake. He had nearly quit because of it. Now he stood awkwardly in front of her, holding a file. He told her he had watched her over the past months. He had seen her changes. He had heard her apology. Then he said something she didn't expect. He forgave her. Amelia felt tears threaten again. She thanked him, but he shook his head and smiled softly. He said forgiveness was not for her comfort. It was for both of them to move forward. That stayed with her for days. Forgiveness was not erasing the past. It was choosing not to let it own the future. One afternoon, Charles invited Amelia to lunch. Not in the executive dining room, but at a small diner across town where no one cared about billionaires. He ordered soup. She smiled because somehow that felt perfectly right. He looked older than before, and for the first time she noticed how tired his hands looked when they rested on the table. He told her his health was getting worse. Doctors had been careful with their words, but he understood the truth. Time was becoming expensive. Amelia felt a sudden tightness in her chest. Charles had become more than a boss, more than a mentor. He had become the father figure life had quietly placed in front of her when she needed one most. He told her he was not afraid of dying. Oh, he was only afraid of leaving behind a world where people still confused wealth with worth. Then he smiled and told her that was why he was less worried now. Because he had seen proof that people could change. He told her he was proud of her. 3 words. Simple. But they hit harder than any promotion, any bonus, any applause she had ever received. She cried openly in the diner. And for once, she didn't apologize for it. Winter arrived. The city streets turned colder, and the shelter filled faster than ever. Amelia worked longer hours there, especially around the holidays. She remembered too clearly what it felt like to pretend Christmas magic existed when there was barely enough money for heat. One night, just before Christmas Eve, Lily came to see her. She was smiling, really smiling, really smiling. She had found stable housing, a small apartment, nothing fancy but safe. She had started working part-time at a daycare center, and the shelter had helped her enroll in evening classes. Her baby girl looked healthier, stronger. Lily handed Amelia a folded note. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were words Amelia would keep forever. You treated me like I was still worth saving when I had stopped believing it myself. Amelia sat alone after she left, holding that note like something sacred. She realized then that Charles had not just given her a second chance. He had taught her how to become someone capable of giving second chances to others. And that was the real inheritance. Not money, not power. Legacy. On New Year's Eve, Grant and Hale hosted its annual charity gala. Months ago, Amelia would have attended for networking, status, and appearances. This time she attended because the event was raising funds for transitional housing programs. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but quiet. Her mother stood beside her, proud and emotional. Charles arrived late, and when he entered, the room shifted. Respect followed him like light. But instead of going to investors or politicians, he moved directly toward Amelia's mother. He took her hand and thanked her. He said the world should be grateful to the woman who raised someone brave enough to change. Her mother cried instantly. So did Amelia. That night, before the speeches began, Charles stepped onto the stage. He looked over the crowd, over the chandeliers and luxury and polished success, and spoke softly enough that everyone leaned closer. He said people spend their lives chasing titles, believing the goal is to be important. But importance fades. What remains is how people felt after meeting you. Did they feel smaller, or did they feel seen? He looked directly at Amelia, and everyone understood. By the end of the speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. A week later, Charles Grant passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news spread across the country. Headlines called him a billionaire visionary, a financial genius, a corporate legend. But Amelia knew the truest description was much simpler. He was a man who never forgot what it meant to be invisible. At his private memorial, Amelia stood before family, executives, and people from shelters across the city. She spoke with shaking hands. She told them Charles had changed her life not by rescuing her from failure, but by forcing her to face it. She said he taught her that humiliation can destroy a person or awaken them. That kindness is often disguised as accountability, and that the richest people are not those who have the most, but those who leave the most love behind. When she finished, the room stood in silence. Not polite silence, not sacred silence, the kind reserved for truth. Years later, people would still tell the story. They would whisper about the woman who once humiliated a beggar outside a bank only to discover he was her billionaire boss. Some told it like gossip, some told it like karma. But Amelia told it differently. She told it as grace, because the real miracle was not that the beggar was secretly rich. The real miracle was that someone she had wronged chose not to destroy her, but to teach her. And every morning before entering the tower, Amelia still stopped at the sidewalk near those marble steps. Sometimes she left coffee, sometimes food, sometimes just conversation, because she never wanted to forget where pride had nearly buried her and where mercy had brought her back. She had once believed power meant standing above others. Now she knew the truth. The strongest people are the ones willing to kneel, and every time she did, somewhere deep inside, she could still hear Charles Grant's quiet voice reminding her, "Character is what you do when no one important is watching." Now she understood. Everyone is important.